Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's Maynard, Mike, Matt, and Colin. Yes, we are the firm with the most Matts in energy finance. We're really excited today. We've got a fantastic guest. We've got Chet Thompson. Welcome, Chet. It's so great to see you. Chet's the president and CEO of the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. And so, wow, talk about anytime it would be lucky to get you, Chet, but given what's going on in Washington and what's going on with fuel prices and renewable fuels and potential for taxes and, just you name it, we are especially lucky to have you. And so welcome. Get your running shoes on because we've got a lot of questions for you. Can't wait to talk to you. Let's run through the news. Not that there's barely any news, right, Mike? There's nothing happening in the world. There's barely anything to talk about. But seriously, Mike, why don't you tell us what's going on the screen? There's a heck of a lot.
Yeah, Maynard, oil is above $80. Natural gas is at $5.50. So it's things are still looking really, really good. But, let's share a couple things, in these slides here. One of the things we've been showing for the last couple of weeks is, what's been going on with, commodity prices in Europe. And what we've seen is that nothing always goes up straight to the right. And what we've seen is, European electric prices in general are down about 25%, gas down about 25%, U.S. gas down 13% for the week. Crude oil was actually up, and coal prices were down 17%. So we just saw everything really gap down last week. But if you look over here and see the performance of the equities since last week we talked, everything's up. And so that's really, really good. Commodities, kind of going sideways and the equities are going up. I thought something was really interesting here is this chart. And it's gotten a lot of airplay over the last week. And what this chart is North American fertilizer prices, which is the white line. You can see it way up here in basically 10, 12-year highs. And you're seeing over here commodity, Bloomberg Agricultural Commodity Spot Index. And as you can tell, it's way down here. It can go a lot higher. And the reason I show this is that because we've been talking about natural gas prices, commodity prices, but we really have not focused on agricultural prices, and they're up a lot. Given where fertilizer prices are, they're going to probably be going a lot higher. And you know what? This creates a lot of civil unrest if your food prices start to go up a lot. So the combination of natural gas prices, commodity prices, and now food prices are going to be going up a lot in the next couple months. So something to keep an eye on. And the last thing is that we always, close things out. Just looking at the headlines for the last 48 hours, I think some of the interesting ones are China is putting energy security first, even as it pursues a green transition. And China is now rethinking its climate goals, given what's going on. This is very relevant as we move into COP26, which is going to happen in early November. And some other things are actually kind of comical out there. California moves towards a ban on gas lawnmowers and leaf blowers. It's pretty funny. Green groups seek to block Wisconsin power line construction, and some of these other things. It's funny. You're seeing a lot of like stuff going on, and really politicians and reacting to it just don't seem to make a lot of sense here. And so it's most of these things are just kind of comical. And so I like to close it out every week with just some sort of quotes and. This is, to me, is kind of relating to what's going on in green energy and the energy transition, where we're sitting there saying a lot of people are just not looking at this the correct way. And it just says real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. And life is really simple, but we insist on making it more complicated. And I think that's what's happening in the energy transition is like stuff that we should really be concentrating on getting rid of. We're not. We're trying to do a lot of other things, and it's really complicating matters, and it's really creating the situation we're in right now.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot going on in there, Mike. Thanks for that summary. Let me jump to you, Matt Portillo. You've been out on the road talking to investors, and you were also at the GM Analyst Day, which sounded kind of fun. We're all car guys at heart, but tell us what's on your mind.
Sure thing. So the team went out to New York and Boston and spent 4 days on the road talking to investors. I think it was actually a really constructive trip. In New York, most of the conversations are really focused around natural gas and how we're thinking about the winter backdrop as it relates to a normal weather environment, a cold weather environment in which may lead to commodity prices skyrocketing north of $10 an MCF in the U.S. and maybe higher, and then what could happen on a warmer forecast, which ultimately we think is probably underpinning kind of 350 to 375 strip. At the end of the day, a lot of clients, I think, are positioned long some of the natural gas equities because they do look cheap on a fundamental valuation basis and are just interested in talking about the macro environment from a gas perspective. Boston was actually a really constructive meeting round for us. Generally, clients are looking back at the energy space now for a couple of different reasons. One, there is this broader concern that inflation trends will continue to move higher, and energy adds to that exposure and it provides some portfolio protection. Two, especially as it relates to upstream, but a lot of other subsectors within energy, the yield increasing in the space is actually drawing dividend income funds to look at the space again. And then three, it's a sector that still seems to be underweight for a lot of PMs and money managers. And while they're not rushing back to the sector at the moment, if the industry continues along the path of capital discipline and we continue to see commodity prices well supported by fundamentals, it does feel like we're going to start to see some more capital flow back in on an active management perspective. So things actually coming out of Boston were quite constructive. The first time we've actually started to hear these conversations in quite some time. And as long as the industry sticks to its guns around capital allocation, I think we're setting up for a really constructive 2022.
Matt, can I ask you a slightly provocative question? I think I know the answer, but we've seen all these private companies picking up rigs, right? What would happen if a public company did that? A meaningful increase? I know I got my head down, it's going to be bad, but is there anybody remotely asking that question?
The long onlys are asking that question, I think, in the view that if they see that happen in a meaningful way, they'll be looking to sell that stock and rotate it to companies that are more disciplined on the capital front. So right now for 2022, growth is persona non grata. As we get into 23 and 24, moderate levels of low single-digit growth, I think, are acceptable. But until OPEC reverses production, until we see full supply coming back on stream, there's really no need for U.S. production growth in the system today. And then just to wrap it up on the GM Analyst Day, I was out in Detroit for 2 days, a great event, really a lot of interesting things happening. A couple of key thematic things that really have popped up from a client conversation perspective. First, as it kind of relates to the energy complex, the legacy OEMs have really taken to heart value over volume. And that's something that we've been talking about thematically in the space. But essentially, auto manufacturers are prioritizing margins over market share, and that's leading to a healthier industry, and that's going to, quite frankly, provide a constructive backdrop in 2022 and beyond. Secondarily, tech is becoming a big part of the industry, and that's something that we've talked about in our initiation pieces, as well as some of the company-specific work we've done. And as you saw with the GM guidance, it is actually going to lead to a material uplift in corporate EBIT margins, and ultimately, I think, higher multiples for the industry moving forward. And then lastly, an event that we're looking forward to, Cruise, which is GM's Level 4 autonomy system, is going to be running paid driverless ride-sharing programs in San Francisco at the beginning of next year and starting to scale that in a meaningful way. So I think one thing that we've been talking about with investors and one thing we're quite excited about is Level 4 autonomy is coming, and it's coming, I think, quicker than a lot of folks expect. And we're going to start to see that show up in many of the major cities in the U.S. over the next few years. And then the last little fun fact, when they closed out the event, they had the new EV Hummer line up on the starting line against a ICE vehicle Ferrari, and they raced, and the Hummer smoked the Ferrari. Those EV vehicles do provide a lot of torque, and a 9,000-pound vehicle going down the road at 0 to 60 in 3 seconds was pretty impressive to see. So it was a fun event overall.
Now, Matt, did they let you drive one? That was the rumor down here, is they were going to let you drive one.
We got to ride in a number of different vehicles. I did ride in the Hummer, and it definitely pins you to the back of the seat when they kick that thing into high gear.
Nice. All right. Well, Matthew Blair, I'm about to jump to Colin, but you know a lot about the space we're going to be talking about today, fuel and petrochemicals. Anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, thanks, Maynard. Yeah, I would just say, RINs have been a pretty topical issue for investors lately. I remember about 3 weeks ago, we had a leaked RVO hit. RVO stands for Renewable Volume Obligation. And the numbers indicated that RIN supply demand would be easing up here. And as a result, RIN prices sold off. It's been very favorable for refining equities. The group is up about 19% since that announcement. Now, the interesting thing that investors are asking about is that RIN prices have started to recover over just the past couple of weeks. And investors are trying to figure out, why that is. Our view is that RIN prices will sell off from here. We're calling for D6 ethanol RINs to sell off about 70% from current levels, and D4 biodiesel and renewable diesel RINs to sell off about 30%. So as usual, these environmental attribute categories are really moving the needle for the refining space.
Well, those are big percentage moves. Colin, before we jump to Chet, put us in the mood for a lot of fuel and petrochemical conversation. We know you've always got something good teed up.
Well, last week we talked about the scarcity in European natural gas inventory. So there's a fundamental story behind gas and power prices in Europe, and also an inflationary component as well. And one of the things that was really kind of startling about the natural gas movements worldwide was what price was required to get those fertilizer plants to begin to trim some of their capacity utilization. Aluminum smelters as well. And of course, the answer was a price somewhere in the vicinity of $35 to $50 per MMBTU, the equivalent of $200 to $250 crude oil. So what we've seen this week is the natural question of, well, is this about to get into oil? Now that I'm looking at an $80 handle, and put it in context, what does it mean to have an $80 price today with the inflation that we have? So we have a couple of charts to illustrate it. The first is this one. It's the real average retail gasoline price, regular grade in the United States in August 2021 dollars. And a couple of points really stand out. The first is that the April 2020 price at $2.07 in real dollars was about the lowest price in 20 years. So that's been the starting point for this move. Now, obviously, big round numbers appeal to the human brain as something that we get energized about, whether it's $2, $3, $4. But take a look at this first move up from that April low. It's pretty comparable to the moves we saw from troughs in 2008 and 2016, got us to about the same price level, $3.25. Now, that's where we're at today. We can see the agita across all political channels, lots of finger pointing, lots of reckless ideas about how we should solve this supposed problem. But cast your eye back to this period. When we look back to the Obama administration, all 8 years, the average real price was $3.62 in what we think of as dollars. The world did not end. There wasn't even that much of a stress on the economy at that time. The frequency of a monthly price higher than prices are today was 71% of the time. Now, to be fair, it's not about any particular side of the political aisle. If we go to the prior administration, the Bush administration, the average real price was $3.02. The frequency of a monthly average price higher than today was about 52% of the time. And take a look at these peaks. When we did need to go and destroy demand, we needed prices in the equivalent of $4.75 to $5.15 per gallon. And if we think back to what we've just discovered through the FX markets and natural gas, that price arguably is even higher still. Now, when you look at the footnote down here, I should add that the average price in California today is $4.44 per gallon. And we are seeing in a single county in California an average price of $5.36. So important to keep that in mind. When we look at inventories, floating stocks have cleared. Crude oil on the water is down about 1/4 billion barrels from the COVID peak level, a decline of 274 million barrels. So very sharp draw in inventory, but back to kind of where we were in the pre-COVID period. When we look at commercial petroleum stocks, gasoline inventories are actually higher than they were at the pre-COVID point 2 years ago, 15% higher, in fact, 2% higher on the Gulf Coast, 1% higher in the Rockies. So this is not a problem about U.S. refinery supply, U.S. refinery stocks, getting the product to the customer. There's a perception issue where many of us still have our kind of price anchors back in 2015, 2014, and inflation is sneaking up on us. Now, that's not to say that inventories are ample or comfortable in all petroleum products. Propane and propylene stocks are low, and that does apply across the NGLs. And of course, there's going to be a little bit of a substitution effect there with natural gas, which is why we've seen such a sharp upward movement in Mont Belvieu cash prices. Baker Hughes rig count, we already mentioned this, but just to put a point on it, we have had a very sharp increase in U.S. rigs, plus 264 year over year, but we're still down 257 from the pre-route level, the pre-COVID level. And when we look at production, we're at about 17.89 million barrels per day for field production of liquids, down from 19.07 in the first week of March 2020. We've seen some gains in NGLs and biofuels, about 500,000 barrels per day, partially offset losses in crude and condensate, down about 1.7 million barrels per day. Emphasizing again that this is not really the same kind of scarcity story in liquids that it is in natural gas. Here's our projection for spare capacity in global liquids, December 2021. OPEC 10, we've got at 4.3 million barrels per day. Rest of OPEC, basically 1.1. Add it all up, upwards of 10 million barrels per day. Now, Mike and I were talking about this earlier, and he makes the point that he's somewhat skeptical of a couple of these line items. And, I think that's a fair point. This number could be a little bit lower than, kind of what the numbers would lead you to believe, but still in the present moment, pretty solid. So the story is not one of a shortage of barrels. It's a surplus of dollars. Here you're looking at the cumulative growth in major central banks' balance sheets since January of 2013, up $17 trillion. 11 trillion of that has come since September 2019. The Fed accounts for 42% of this expansion, and the ECB accounts for 40%. Where do we have inflation? The United States and Europe. No surprise, just absolutely massive flows of capital. When we look around the world at what prices are sticky for gasoline, you can see a number of states here and counties on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, a number of countries. Now, obviously, taxation is always the big thing you got to pay attention to when you're doing this kind of comparative analysis. But we would make the point that, as I said, California is already at 444. Humboldt, California is at 480. Every single county in California now has a price above $4.20 at the pump. And when we look around the world, that's about where Brazil is, all the way into the European countries, the rich countries, or this list is basically rich countries or big countries, lots and lots of prices higher than what we see worrying politicians in the United States. So what's the punchline? Final slide. The question then becomes, if you do see that kind of investor interest or speculator interest that Matt was talking about, and the question on the table being, maybe we do get to $100 crude, what are the NYMEX options traders building in as the probability of that event? And the answer is about a 5% probability in the CLZ1 contract, which expires next month on November 20th, up to about a 15% probability by the middle of next year. Now, to be clear, the expected price still has a 7 handle. Somewhere in the mid 70s is the collective wisdom of the market of where crude should be. And these are conditional probabilities. So if we did begin to see a colder than normal winter, or precautionary hoarding or something like that, this 15% probability could quickly get to 30. I would also make one final point. The settlement price for the prompt November contract on NYMEX as of yesterday was $80.52. That is the equivalent of $1.92 per gallon. And so just think about that for a moment. If I had said the price was $1.92, you might have thought it didn't sound so high. 80 probably does get all of us asking the question about the $100 crude, but there is no small motion here in the value of the dollar itself. And when that's happening, it can really mess with your perceptions, because absolutely none of us think in terms of real dollars. We just go to nominal and we think the price should be X because it was where it was 5 years ago. And that could be a fatal mistake in the current environment.
Colin, you're reminding me as the first Thanksgiving home from college, I think I tried to tell my dad about real versus nominal prices. And he gave me a lecture like, hey boy, hey college kid, there's only one price and it's real prices. Anyway, Chet, it's a delight to have you. There's so much going on in your space, and the guys have, you can hear it in the pregame. There's so much going on right now. It would have been a delight anytime to have you, but to have you in all of this, like, I feel bad taking you away from your job because you're you're talking to senators and congresspeople and regulators, trying to keep them calm. But do you want to kick off and just talk a little bit about AFPM and your members and your history there? I know previously you were a lawyer. You've got a ton of experience, and bless you for taking on this job. But maybe to start and tell us a little bit about the organization.
Sure. Well, happy to. First, let me, Maynard and team, thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be here. And that was a very impressive, quick overview of where we are right now. And so thank you for that. Who is AFPM? AFPM is one of the oldest trade associations in DC, and I guess hence the country. We actually go all the way back to 1902. Been around a very, very long time. I joined the organization about 6 years ago. But AFPM is what we call, as you know, a downstream organization. We represent the refiners, domestic refiners, and also the petrochemical industry. That is the way it's been for our entire history until last year. And last year, we now allow pure midstream plays members to join. So think Plains, All America, right? So now they can become a full-fledged member of AFPM. And so we probably have in the mid 60s to be a full member at AFPM, you have to own and operate a refinery, a petrochemical facility, and now a midstream company that's delivering products to a refinery or a petrochemical, or making sure products get to market. And then on top of that, we probably have 300 what we call associate members, and those are all the various companies that that are affiliated with the industry, from construction, Turner Industries, those types, down to law firms and advisors and all kinds of folks. So it's a great organization. We only have offices here in DC. We're lean and mean, but our focus in life is the downstream. So we look through all of policy, all the regulations, all of the legal challenges we get in, again, through the lens of how it impacts the downstream sector.
And, we'll encourage everybody to go to your website and attach a link. You've got a lot of great information there. The annual report, I think we should also attach that. It's got a lot of great information. But I guess one of the things that jumps out from the website, Chet, is you guys, right now, the taxation proposals that are on the table, they have the possibility of hitting petrochemicals and refining pretty hard, which has a lot of follow-on effects, as we all know. Do you want to maybe start with that issue and talk a little bit about the debate as you see it right now?
Yeah, sure. Certainly a big part of our lives around here, at least those of us that are in, the advocacy shop, which we have about half of our guys here are, I would say, in advocacy one way or the other. Certainly reconciliation and the bipartisan infrastructure package has been a huge part of where our focus has been. And as it relates to the infrastructure, at least as it existed a week or so ago, the $3.5 trillion one, most of our focus there was on the tax side, right? And a lot of things were in play. I could say, broadly speaking, we were trying to make sure that the downstream sector, refiners and petchem, certainly weren't going to be disadvantaged, or there was a lot of, punitive measures, tax measures in there just to our industry. And, one think about that, things that were being debated were, a tax on methane at about $1,800 a ton. Both on not only on domestically produced production, but also on imports. And the import side certainly was going to have an impact on refiners. There was a polluter pay provision in there that was considering, taxing those that are largely responsible for CO2 emissions in the country over the last couple of decades. There was a proposal to eliminate MLPs. There was a proposal to double the Superfund tax for oil, as you guys probably know. In the infrastructure bill, I should mention, there was the reinstatement of the Superfund tax on chemical, which impacts the chemical industry. And then also in reconciliation, there was a plastics tax, 20 cents a pound. Certainly a big potential impact on my petrochemical manufacturers and what that would mean for their, global competitiveness. And, this was all in addition to, raising the corporate rate, of course, which is something that you might imagine we're opposed to in these parts.
And Chet, I was just, curious because, almost all of our listeners and all of us are energy people. So we can disentangle these types of proposals and understand why they're not going in the right direction, why they are counterproductive, why the country shouldn't do these things. But when you talk to a congressperson, who's not an energy person, and they just instinctively think, well, taxing methane sounds good. How do you talk them out of these things if you can? Do you mind kind of giving us that?
No, thanks for the question. And look, by the way, this goes beyond how we talk to policymakers. I mean, this goes to how, I should have said, and I'll digress for a minute, at AFPM, we have like three core missions. One is advocacy, both on the federal and state side, certainly tracking public policy that impacts our industries. And on the state side, we don't have boots on the ground in every state, but we're tracking every state, and we get involved in policies that have precedential impact for the rest of the industry. So we have advocacy, and then we have, we have communications, and that may sound a bit strange that be one of our three pillars, but we have put great emphasis over the last few years to improve the way we communicate what we do, how our products make life better, make modern life possible. In fact, we have a campaign called We Make Progress, and you can learn more about it by going to wemakeprogress.org, and you'll find out a lot more. But we have come to find out that, we as an industry have to talk better about what we do and why we do it and why it matters, right? Because very few people outside of the Gulf, outside those that know our industry, really ever sit down and think about these things. And it really starts there. And then by the way, the third pillar is the technical pillar. And we have lots of focus around here on things like safety and occupational safety, process safety. How do we keep our plants running? How do we keep our community safe, our workforce safe? And I'm really proud about that work. And I'll circle back to that later. But coming to your back, Maynard, this is long-winded, as you can tell, I used to be a lawyer. But coming back to the question of how we engage policymakers, it's the start about making sure people appreciate, how many things in our modern lives depend upon our stuff. And I submit to you, it's shocking how little people really think about that, and I love to hold up to younger people, my own kids, the cell phone, the computers, the synthetic golf shirts, their running shoes. I mean, everything we touch and feel and use comes from our products. And so one, you try to get them there. Two is a misunderstanding about the fact that our industry really is committed to sustainability, and we're committed to improving our environmental footprint, and we've made tremendous progress. You alluded to where I came before. I spent 2 decades practicing environmental law, and so I know how committed this industry is to improving what we do. And then you get into the fact that, these taxes, is going to have a dramatic impact on the price that consumers pay for all these goods. And right now there's an administration that talks about, not wanting to increase taxes on those making under $400,000. Well, look, none of the things they're proposing would be consistent with that mission. Everything. From a, it's one thing to say, oh, we're going to put a 20 cent tax on a pound of plastic resin. Well, all of that has an impact on what things cost. We see what happens when you have policies that increase the price of crude oil, and it ends up hitting us, at the pump. And so, those are the things that we're stressing, that all of this, has implications. None of this means we're anti-transition or anti, being, more sustainable. But we need to be thoughtful about our policies, and we need to consider the fact that this is going to have real impacts on everyday consumers. We've made, the COVID had the the biggest demand destruction the industry's ever seen. And, we're finally coming out of it. To at this point, lay on top of the industry these punitive taxes would certainly be a bad thing to do at this time. So those are the kind of messages that we have. And the reaction is to most is really surprising. They usually have, frankly, no idea of the level of effort and commitment that our industry is making to sustainability. And to, when I tell them things like, our emissions are down 90% over the last couple of decades, that our, carbon intensity is down 12%, over the last 5 years. Anyway, I could go on and on. And so, but because we as an industry have really historically done a really poor job of communicating these types of messages to policymakers and consumers.
Chet, maybe a follow-on question to that. How important is security of supply and actually realizing some of the benefits that the U.S. industry has provided to the consumer around cheap, reliable supply? I'm thinking of things like Line 5 and propane imports into Michigan, or some of the gas pipelines that could obviously supply cheaper gas into some of the regional markets, as well as obviously a lot of just benefits we're seeing from the petrochemical industry being based in the U.S. and not having to import some of those products. Just how does that play into these conversations with politicians?
Well, that's a great comment and great question. Certainly something that we stress. Again, we find, that, look, people, as you guys know better than anybody, is, consumers, we need, affordability and reliability. And I would say most folks, take for granted that when you flip the switch, lights come on, or that you can go fill up. And it takes something like, what happened in Colonial Pipeline, or what happens after Ida, or what happens in the Great Texas Freeze Out, right? I mean, it takes something like that for people to realize and start to take, start to realize they shouldn't take any of this for granted. I wish I could tell you that when I tell folks that the light bulb goes off. I think it's hard. It's hard to make them understand just how good we have it. And, and we're hoping, frankly, some of the things that you guys talked about, energy prices in Europe, recently. And these are the kind of things that we need to be mindful of and make sure it doesn't happen here in this country. But I can tell you, it's a message that we have to continue to do. Energy security, North American security. When we were trying to get, the UMCA, what do they call it? Whatever, the NAFTA 2.0 done, we were talking about North American security and how important that is when you factor out we're energy independent and energy secure, particularly if you count Canada with us, since we get about 40% of our imports from Canada. And just, it's hugely important both here in the country and just geopolitically.
Chet, one question for you. Do you find as you're, making your way around the halls of power, wherever they are, state and federal, are there consumer advocacy groups, or we always hear about, labor unions, get involved and speak up for their members and jobs and things like that. But increasingly you wonder about consumer groups who are focused on, or AARP, people whose incomes are going to be dramatically affected by all this indirect taxation of this stuff. Are there groups like that are speaking to the non-energy people in power and trying to reinforce the message?
Man, that's a great question. And, I wish I could tell you that there are, lots of groups out there doing it. And there are some groups doing it, but as you can imagine, it's a challenging time for people to stand up in defense of our industry right now, right? Because there's this false narrative that if you push back on some of these popular notions, that means that you deny climate change or you don't recognize the risk. So I say that meaning that, there should be more folks standing up, and periodically there are. There have been, by the way, it's some minority groups that we work with have been quite concerned about some of these policies because, as you increase in energy prices tends to be regressive, and it impacts those in lower economic strata much more. And so we've been spending, time in California and other places that are considering banning the internal combustion engine. I wish I forgot who mentioned it, but someone mentioned banning lawn equipment, et cetera. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so real. But as you know, California has proposed to ban the internal combustion engine beginning in 2030. And there have been some groups, some Hispanic groups in particular, that have raised the alarm bells about what this would cost and what this would mean to folks that need, cars to get to work, and those that have less means to pay for it. And so we have been hearing more from those groups. But I'll tell you, man, it's so important to us. We're out there trying to connect with groups. And the other thing that we do in this space that I think is probably the most effective is we've created a program that we call Empower. And it's a way to connect with our 3.5 million, people that are, working directly for us or indirectly affiliated with the downstream sector. And, we have a program where we're trying to make sure we're supporting folks who can have conversations at, church and their PTA meetings and the dreaded Thanksgiving dinner, with extended family when these topics come up. And what we're finding from our workforce is that they're incredibly proud to work for us. They want to engage in these conversations. They want to engage in policy, and they want to be out there, touting the virtues, because we are a noble industry, right? That's something I believe to my core, and we're a very noble group, and we're trying to get that workforce more engaged and armed with, the way and the information to talk about our industry. Again, long-winded.
No, it's great. I think Matt's got another one, but you're making me realize, we ought to do like the Monday before Thanksgiving. Let's put out the Thanksgiving talking for everyone who's about to sit around the table. And if you're pro energy, pro American energy, how to field these questions you're going to get from your relatives. This could be a real winner.
No, I think you should do that. And we've answered questions, everything from, what's that steam coming, what's that coming out of your stack? And to talk to us about, the $100 billion that the industry's invested over the last couple of decades to become cleaner, to talk to us about our renewable fuels programs, how much money we've been investing. I mean, we are really doing a lot, and we need to arm folks and make sure folks are aware of it.
Chet, maybe just another follow-up on the industry dynamic, and it seems like there's a lot of capital and support on Capitol Hill for renewable investment, which obviously I think is the bridge to the future and reaching kind of net zero targets. One thing that doesn't necessarily get as much uniform support as we see it today is how the industry may actually play a role in carbon reduction through carbon capture and sequestration. And it does touch the petrochemical industry, the refining industry. We've seen some of the really economic projects on the ethanol front move forward, but it feels like that really is a win-win for the industry and also for reducing emission targets. How do you think the policymakers are thinking about that, how they may respond, and how the industry reception would be around that technology and support under 45Q?
Well, let me start with the latter. And I think the industry absolutely would support it. This is something, there has been individual pieces of legislation over the, last 3 or 4 years that, that has been supportive of CCUS. And that's something that AFPM and our members have certainly supported. The National Petroleum Council came out with a report and said one of the best public policies that could help support the reduction of carbon from industry would be to support carbon capture, create the tax credit and incentives to encourage more of it. We think, there's some traction there. We think, there are certainly a lot of folks, public policy folks, that would be open to moving forward with this. Where you run into problems, candidly, is just some folks that policymakers that just don't want to necessarily see a future with us and are reluctant to, adopt policies that they believe are extending our life. But I'm optimistic and about it. I'm sure you saw, a letter that came out of the Gulf recently of all the folks that have all the companies that signed on to support to Exxon's proposal to sequester carbon down in the Houston area, and that got a lot of attention. And it's something we're focused on. That if you're serious about reducing carbon, that has to be on the table, not only for our industry but for all industries.
So one question, Chet, that we've been debating here as you're watching, everything happening from California to Europe to just all over the place, is this backdrop, is it going to cause people, like Mike had the headline about China pausing on energy transition goals, and you would think that a real rational thing to do would be to kind of call a timeout and say, wait a minute, maybe we're going too fast. Maybe we've called a few to the wrong place. Like let's modify the game plan. But there's another theory. I was talking to our good friend Tisha Schuler today, and she said, the other theory is all these price increases, all this stress is going to lead some people to say, I knew I didn't like oil and gas. Let's go even faster. And what do you think is the mood about the pace of all this? Are people looking up saying, we need to pump the brakes? Or is it just as polarized as it's always been? What do you pick up on?
Well, I'd say two things. One, I think politically it's as polarized probably as ever, right? I think where you sat in this debate before this happened, you've just reinforced it. Either it says, see, we should slow down, or the others are going to go faster. Unfortunately, right, there's very little bipartisanship on this issue, or any issue really in this town. It's and I'm born and raised here. This is something like I've never seen before. But let me just tell you that I don't think any of this is going to change where our industry is and where our members are. And, just broadly speaking, we view this as that we have, I call internally, it's, the dual challenge. We have the challenge to provide the fuels and the petrochemicals that we know the world and our country need. And we know the demand is not going away anytime soon. People a lot smarter than I have concluded that. You can look at the population growth across the globe, another 2 billion people by 2050. I think for the first time ever, over half the people on the planet are in the middle class now. And so we know that there's going to be demand here, but my members are committed to meeting that demand sustainably. And we know it's our responsibility to do this. And so I just want to be clear. We as an industry are going to continue to drive forward with trying our best to find ways to continue to be more sustainable and reduce our impacts. And I don't see, the bigger policy debate shifting terribly. I would say certainly over the next couple of months, reconciliation is going to stay front and center. I think what's going to change is whether it's $1.92 trillion reconciliation with a pretty substantial climate aspect to it, and it's just what's off the table is $3.5 trillion.
Well, I saw somewhere the headline that the $2 trillion people are now viewed as the moderates. These are like the sensible people, which is I shouldn't laugh. It's one of those things like the California. If it weren't so sad, it'd be funny.
Right.
But maybe, Chet, you referenced all the investment that's going into sustainability, how the companies are cleaning up, how the companies are focused on renewable fuels. All that whole space is fascinating. I know Matt and his team pay a lot of attention to it. It comes up across our firm. But maybe talk about that space, because that's a really the drop-in fuel space, if you will. That's an exciting part of the business.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of activity, as you guys know. Someone recently told me that in the last year or so, about $2 billion worth of investment been plowed mostly into renewable diesel in the last year or so, and more projects are no doubt in the queue. And that's it's a combination of a lot of things that I'm sure that are driving this. In part, consumer demand for more sustainable products. It definitely plays into it. But then you have a couple programs, one in California, low carbon fuel standards that are in California and now Washington and Oregon. That's certainly a big factor that is pushing folks into renewable diesel as well as the renewable fuel standard. And, the compliance costs that inflicts upon the industry, that's a factor in this. And then you sprinkle on top, good measure, a blender tax credit of $1 per gallon, which makes it, in order to get into the black. And, there we are. And so we've seen, again, that's what's driving these projects. And even when I was talking a little bit earlier, with Matthew, I mean, even if the RFS gets reformed, I don't see those pressures, changing much because of low carbon fuel standards on the West Coast and, the likelihood that those types of programs could spread to other parts of the country. Now, I will say that, that's completely different than we can get into, the renewable fuel standard, which is, been a program that, that we continue to believe is broken and needs to be reformed, to be sure. But I'll stop there and I can answer any questions on that. But we are very excited about these renewable diesel projects. And by the way, in some of the other projects that are out there in the name of, more advanced biofuels.
Well, one question for you, Chet. I guess what we're all struck by just anecdotally is, whether it's CO2 or, renewable fuels or just, methane capture, your space has become, it seems, it was always an innovative space, but it seems like the potential for innovation in your space is now huge. Like maybe it might revolutionize more than any other part of the chain. Not to be overly dramatic. What are you noticing with spending, with getting new people, with technology partners, technology sharing, the ESG reporting? Like what would you say about that space and your member companies?
Well, what I would say more than anything, it's just the enthusiasm around all the aforementioned topics made it more than anything that's changed. And, certainly ESG is front and center, as you can imagine. I'm sure it is, with a lot of other industries. There's a lot of enthusiasm around, what we can do to help the transportation fleet become more efficient. For years, one of the things that hasn't been talked about is, AFPM and its members about 5 years ago, got together with the auto industry and, in deep discussions to try to, find a way to help make the internal combustion engine more efficient. And we know some of the ways to do that. And, the autos were telling us one thing that they want to do is make higher compression engines in order to improve, the efficiency of the ICE. And so in order to do that, they perhaps need different gasoline specs and certainly higher octane fuels. And this is something that our industry embraced, and we worked, and we actually got, a piece of legislation introduced that would have done just that. And this is just another example of how, the industry has rallied around ways, to help reduce our environmental footprint. I'll tell you, you don't get much coverage. In a similar vein, in the last couple of years, there's certainly been, a lot of discussions around the plastic waste issue, particularly, ocean plastic waste. And, that's something that all our petrochemical members believes is unacceptable. And so, those industries have come together. You're seeing great breakthroughs in, plastic recycling, and not the old fashioned mechanical recycling, but chemical recycling, breaking, plastics down to their base petrochemical and rebuilding again. So you've seen, great breakthroughs this year and through CP Chem and INEOS and Exxon, and just announced this week they're going to expand their plastics recycling capabilities and operations, and we're seeing that grow. And so again, our meetings, when we gather and convene industry leaders, all of these topics are front and center, and so that's what's really exciting, and that's what we're. That's what's changed most, Maynard, to me, and even in my relatively short time here, is just how front and center and how much excitement and energy, there is no pun, around these topics.
So, Chet, that point on a circular economy is something that I think gets all of us at TPH excited and really seems to be something that could bring a lot of people together. That it's a good idea and it should happen and it could be done in a reasonable way. But we're also mindful of how little time we have to put it into whatever is the size of the bill. And so can you help us understand or maybe give us your prediction on whether we will actually see these two large bills move through Congress, actually get passed in this calendar year? And if they do, is there going to be a price to pay in December with another debt ceiling fight? I think all of us are kind of a little bit far removed from it, and the sort of things we'd like to see get done in the next 4 weeks doesn't feel like it's the highest priority right now from the bill writers.
Yeah. Well, look, this is just my crystal ball, and I'm sure you could have a panel and everyone would have a slightly different take. If you're just going from, probabilities, I certainly think the probabilities are high that there will be a bipartisan infrastructure bill. I don't know, I'm just making up numbers here, but I'd put that in the, 80% category. And I think there will be reconciliation. And, if you look at the people that, kind of were the most important folks in holding up reconciliation, Senator Manchin, he never said he was not for reconciliation. He was against a $3.5 trillion price tag. And initially he threw out $1.5 trillion. And now, he kind of floats out $1.92 trillion. And so, I think at the end of the day, there's going to be something. There will be a reconciliation bill. And if I had to guess, I'd put it in that $1.92 trillion range. What you heard today, the speaker talk about too, is like now they're talking about just how to, the best way to reduce those numbers, and whether they reduce it by giving all the programs a haircut or whether they reduce it by throwing some of the programs, overboard. And it sounds like they're leaning towards the latter right now. So I think there'll be one. I mean, look, is there a chance, that the Washington football team could win the Super Bowl? Yeah, there's a chance, but it's low, very low. And I would say it's low that this whole thing craters. Actually, it's higher than the Washington football team winning. It's probably about 25% chance, I would say, it could collapse. But there's going to be tremendous pressure on Senator Sinema and Manchin to get on the program with something to get this done. So if I was betting my money, I would say both get done. The debt ceiling, I like to, yes, that will get done. I mean, if it always gets done, knock on this wooden, desk, right? One of the things that the Republicans did by extending it was eliminate the excuse that they didn't have enough time to get this done through reconciliation. I mean, that's been removed. I mean, they don't have that. And I don't think with all the how beat up McConnell got from quote unquote blinking last week, I don't think he's going to blink again, which means I think the Democrats are going to have to pass, the debt ceiling through reconciliation on their own. And that will happen.
So, Chet, we can't thank you enough for joining. I want to echo that. And we can't thank you enough for what you're doing. Fighting a lot of these with the wind in your face on these issues is very admirable. And I also want to thank Dave Lamp because Dave reached out and said, you got to meet Chet. He'd make a great guest. So, Dave, if you're out there watching, I want to say thank you. But maybe we could just wrap up with one question for you, Chet, which is the rest of us are so concerned about these battles. We care. We're going to talk at our Thanksgiving table and do everything we can. But what could we do to help you? And please know, all of us at TPH, as you need anything from us, we're here to help. But what can we do to help you with the struggle, so to speak?
Well, one is to continue to do what you're doing. I know that my members, most of my members, lots of my members rely on your research and think very highly of you, and you're great advocates for the industry. So that's critically important and not as common as it used to be, right? And then I think the other way is to continue to do things like you're doing now, where we're finding avenues and channels to get us talking and communicating. So that's the number one thing. A couple of years ago, and you mentioned Dave Lamp, he was here working with me when we did this. We did a study of how the media covers energy markets in our industry and our products, and we found, this is back in 2016, so it's a little dated, but back in that time, 93% of every story about our industry was negative. Okay, and so I say that meaning, imagine how difficult it is for advocacy, for hiring the next generation of refinery worker or those that want to go in our industry against that negative backdrop, which is why we think it's so critically important for us to talk more about what we do and what we make possible. That's why we created a campaign, the campaigns that, we make progress. And that's our mantra here. We make progress. We make modern life possible. We're noble. And I think all of us related and involved in the industry need to be out there communicating this, going forward, because that's what it's going to take to make folks, start to look at us differently.
Well, you're doing your part. That's for sure, Chet. We really do appreciate it. I think we're going to try to keep doing what we can to help. I think part of it, as you listen to it, is just being sympathetic to people who are not energy people, who do have concerns, who've been told that, that the energy industry is the enemy. Just kind of, if you grew up that way, or if that's where you live, we have to help them understand, hey, we get it. If we were you, we'd probably feel the same way. But maybe we'll do the Thanksgiving talking points and a good old refinery tour.
Yeah. That would be good. And by the way, on our website, afpm.org, you can get a lot of this stuff we're talking about, and you can get a virtual tour of a refinery and a petchem facility. So
fantastic.
I encourage you to take a look.
We're gonna see if we can drive a lot of traffic your way.
One other thing everyone can do is join AFPM. All of you can join, and we all need to be working together. I say that only a bit tongue in cheek, but seriously, it's imperative now more than ever for the industry to work together. Become a safer industry. Start to talk with more of a unified voice, and we just got to work together.
Absolutely. Well, fantastic. Well, come see us when you're in Houston, Chet. We'll come up there and see you. And thank you again for all you're doing.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. It was a great time.
All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye.